welcome to a brand new episode of the Wadhwani Viewpoint podcast. My name is Manali Shah, and today's conversation is going to be about skills in the future of work, artificial intelligence, Industry 4.0, the new education policy, and bringing more women into India's workforce. Joining us is Robin Bhowmik, the Chief Business Officer of Manipal Global Skills Academy. Through its various programs, the Manipal Global Skills Academy seeks to address the gap between what the academia is producing and what the industry actually needs. Robin, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Could you introduce yourself and the Manipal Global Skills Academy to our audience?
Of course, Manali. So my name is Robin Bhowmik, as you mentioned, and I've been working with Manipal for the last 4 years. I'm essentially a technologist by background. I've spent most of my career in the IT and technology industry. I've also done a startup before I joined Manipal. And my educational background is from essentially UC Berkeley, where I did my postgraduate in management, and prior to that, graduated in economics of all subjects from Jadavpur University in Calcutta. Talking a little bit about Manipal Global and the Skills Academy that we have created, we are essentially trying to solve for the problem of large-scale skills transformation that's driving the future growth for India. In summary. And when we talk about skills transformation, Manipal Global Skills Academy and a lot of our associated businesses that work in industries like banking and insurance, for example, have been building a talent pipeline for the industry for the last 15 years now. And we are very privileged to be possibly the largest finishing school for the industry in this country. Where across some of our skills academies, we train over 20,000 graduates and employees of various organizations every year. So that's a very quick summary and a very quick introduction to Manipal Global and the Skills Academy, and of course to myself.
Wonderful. There are so many aspects to skilling, so let's just get straight to the conversation. To begin with, what are the most sought after skills in 2023?
That's a great question to start with. And the typical answer to that question, if I may kick off with the usual answer that you would get is A, B, C, D. And A for artificial intelligence, B for blockchain, C for cybersecurity, D for data science. And I could go on and on till Z. These are all very critical and very key skills that would make a huge impact across industries. But that's not all, right? So when we talk about, for example, machine learning, or we talk about programming languages such as Python, the application of machine learning or Python is across every industry. But at the same time, I would also bring out skills that are required from a role and functionality perspective. So for example, India is a services country, and some of the growth areas for us are across IT, across banking, across financial services, etc. India today is also becoming the manufacturing hub of the world, right? So we are investing in areas that would include, let's say, prefabrication of semiconductors and chip-based industry. India is a big manufacturer of solar energy. We are actually the largest in the world. And the whole focus on renewables, for example, and renewable energy is another area which is driving industry going forward. And then the whole popularly known concept of Industry 4.0, which everyone talks about, drives the necessity for a completely new set of skills that are largely driven by, for example, automation. for example, robotics, right? So I would say that beyond the ABCD that I talked about, the new age skills across areas, for example, like renewables and solar power, the biggest demand are for roles like project managers in areas like project management. If you look at high-tech manufacturing, the biggest demand are people who understand automation, people who understand robotics, people who understand process manufacturing, etc. And of course, when you look at some of the new areas like, let's say, semiconductor industry, which is coming into India in a big way, the bigger design requirements for semicon is really in how do you do prefab, how do you do design of chips, right? So even before you do manufacturing of a chipset, the critical skill that's required is the ability to design one, right? So design thinking kind of areas would impact the overall skill journey, but it kind of spans across a whole variety of new age skilling requirements. So whether it be services, whether it be manufacturing, whether it be sustainable energy, whether it be even areas like construction, for example, the kind of skills that are required are going to be extremely different. And it's going to span across some of the more popular ones that I mentioned earlier, the ABCD, but also a big function of the role and the application of that particular technology in a particular industry. So it's going to be a combination of all of the above that I just spoke about.
Right, that's very interesting. And going forward into the future of work, which are the skills that you think will take prominence in the future?
So, Manali, I think, the skill sets are very similar to what I just spoke about. So, for example, there is no industry in the country today which is not experimenting with the whole RPA concept. So robotics and process automation is possibly the biggest area of investment for most manufacturing companies, including some of the services companies as well. The second area where a lot of companies are now investing very heavily is the whole area of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, as we start automating processes, as we start automating a lot of human-driven interactions, and we start replacing some of them with bots, the need of the hour is to start building a lot of intelligent bots that are able to, let's say, self-learn along the way, which is where AI and machine learning really comes into play. The third area I would talk about, which is going to have a very high impact across industries, is blockchain. And while we popularly associate blockchain with cryptocurrency, the applications of blockchain are extremely wide and varied. And it essentially puts in a level of trust within the industry across multiple transactions and interactions that any particular customer or any particular entity would have, which is based, as you would know, on a ledger-based kind of a system. In addition to that, when we talk about the future of work, what we have to also be cognizant of is the future of work is not going to necessarily be a 9 to 6 sitting in an office kind of an environment. And when we were hit by COVID in 2020, overnight we all switched from working in an office to working in remote locations. And one of the things that as a workforce we started realizing was the need or the requirement for a lot of soft skills. For example, we talk a lot about technology skills, but we don't really appreciate a lot of soft skills like how do you communicate? Are you able to work in a distributed environment? How are you able to communicate and work effectively, for example, with teams that you might never have met face to face? How do you handle ambiguity? A lot of these are essential drivers of the new age workforce. And as the quality and as the construct of the future of work becomes very different to what we've always been used to, where, for example, if you're sitting across the table from someone and talking to them, you're able to get, let's say, a response mechanism in real time. Whereas when you're interacting with someone on email, the interaction becomes a lot more impersonal, right? And a lot of people are not able to understand and really segregate between the two. So I think the whole area of soft skills, as we call it, the ability to handle a volatile and a changing work environment or an ambiguous work environment, these are all going to play a huge role going forward as well.
Right. And now that you've mentioned soft skills, it leads me to my next question. What are some of the skills that will remain super important no matter how we work or even when the future of work shapes up?
And I was kind of talking just about that. So I think, Manali, the point that I was trying to make to your previous question was that the underlying ability of a human being to work as a part of a larger organization or as a part of a larger team, whether it be in a physical environment or it be in a virtual environment, is essentially what's going to decide their success. Very few roles exist today which work completely in isolation. So, for example, even if you're part of a design team, it's quite possible that your design team is spread across 4 different continents and 6 different countries. Now, that automatically brings in barriers of language, of time lines are different. People's ability to understand, comprehend, and respond and communication skills are very different. So how do you start working in this globally integrated supply chain? I think while we are seeing a lot of countries such as India, of course, now coming to the forefront in terms of building what we call as Atmanirbharta, which is really self-reliance. But at the same time, we work in a global supply chain, which the minute there is an event and political event, let's say in Northern Europe, it impacts the whole world because the supply chains are impacted everywhere. So in such an environment, the kind of skills that people need are boiled down to the basics of being able to communicate clearly and precisely, being able to comprehend clearly and precisely, be able to respond clearly and precisely, right? In a common language, which might not always be a common language like English, for example. So a lot of what's called, again, I'll refer to my soft skills point earlier, continue to remain very valid. The ability to work in the VUCA world, as we call it, volatile, uncertain, there's so much change happening, there's so much ambiguity in the world. That's another key driver for people to be successful. And I would stress on one quality of adaptability, which is very important. I think while most of us might have trained for a certain role or a skill when we were in school or college, does not necessarily mean that we stay with it for the rest of our life. For example, I trained to be an economics graduate, and I have never worked in economics. I have spent my entire career in technology. Adaptability is key, right? And I think those people who will continue to adapt and learn and practice new skills will, of course, be able to survive and outlast their peers.
Right. I couldn't agree more with that. So now let's talk about the gig economy in India. The economy is booming. It provides employment or even additional employments to a number of people across socioeconomic backgrounds. Now, what can be done to upskill these gig workers so that they enter the formal workforce or even start something of their own?
just a outlier thought process. A lot of gig workers might not want to enter the regular workforce because they're very happy working, gigs, because the fundamental of a gig economy is that you work at your own pace. You work on things that interest you, and you work, on timelines that are convenient for you. And in today's world, you also work in a location which is convenient to you. So at Manipal, we continue to study the social and the demographics part very, very closely. We do see a lot of people continuing on the gig economy journey. So they might never wish to enter the formal workforce. But to your point about reskilling them or giving them opportunities so that either they can start something on their own or they want to enter the formal workforce, I could potentially think of a couple of areas, couple of things that they could definitely do. One is what is very important when you come into the regular workforce, as you called it, let's say the corporate kind of culture, is the ability to work within larger teams and adhere to timelines, which essentially kind of enforces a level of discipline that might not always be the experience of somebody who's been part of a gig economy. So the ability to work in a larger team, the ability to work in a distributed team could potentially come in by them volunteering to take on something like an internship, which could potentially be their gateway into the corporate world. The second thing, which is possibly equally important, if not more, is while they might have certain skills which corporate life or, for example, any larger organization would desire, they potentially might need to focus on the role. Because, for example, I might be somebody who knows Java as a skill, but I might not necessarily get a role as a Java developer. I might come in as a quality assurance analyst or a business analyst, because that's what the corporate role that I apply for demands. So for me to able to comprehend and understand the role rather than the skill or the technology is far more relevant. Now, regarding your point about, for example, starting up on your own, I think that's a completely different kettle of fish. A couple of areas that most people struggle with when they start their own business, and I've started my own business and run it, so I can tell you from personal experience. The first one is the ability to handle finance and cash flow. Most people, while they're very technologically very savvy, but their ability to handle money is not great. That's one thing school does not teach us. That's one thing college does not teach us, right? It teaches you how to earn money. It doesn't teach you how to manage money, right? So the whole concept of business finance, including cash flow, etc., is very important. The second thing when you are starting up your own business is the ability to quickly find a market, the ability to quickly launch a product that you could call a minimum viable product, understand or see the success of it, and then decide to either scale up or scale down. Because at the end of the day, every startup entrepreneur knows that you should not fall in love with your product. If your customer does not love your product, then there is something wrong either with the product or with the proposition that you've brought to market. And a lot of startup founders actually fail because they feel that they've got a great product and it's just that the market is not ready or the market is not able to appreciate it. So I think that ability to get a business sense and ability to get a comprehension over the market actually is willing to pay for, that's very important.
Right. Thanks for that perspective, Robin. Let's move on to the next topic, which is artificial intelligence, something that's trending and driving the conversation around the world. So, how do you look at AI and jobs?
Let me start off by kind of talking about the elephant in the room, where when people talk about artificial intelligence, I think the immediate interpretation is from Hollywood movies, where artificial intelligence is taking over the world. It's building humanoids and robots, and they are replacing the human workforce. And then the artificial intelligent engine starts thinking on its own, and there is disaster. Now, while that kind of a scary world scenario is possibly is very remote, the ability of artificial intelligence to actually impact every industry, every business, every aspect of society is unprecedented. And what we are seeing today, for example, is a very basic version of adoption of AI. So while we do have some areas, for example, where AI is creeping in to make even decisions, and I can talk, for example, about, let's say, the whole financial services sector. The financial services sector is something which is adapting to AI much faster than any other sector. And one of the use cases typically for AI in financial services is the ability to understand which customer might become a bad debt scenario, right? So a customer's ability to pay, a customer's ability to, let's say, fund a purchase, the customer's CIBIL scores might not be enough for an accurate representation. So a lot of back office credit-based decisions are now being taken by bots, and the bots are a combination of I would say very basic applications of artificially intelligent algorithms. The next version of it would typically be in, let's say, the whole high-tech manufacturing space, where there are a lot of AI-based factory, automation setups that are actually building, large-scale volumes of automotives, of two-wheelers, of a whole bunch of other mobility applications. That is possibly the other area where there's been a huge impact of AI. But if we were to look at AI in terms of a very basic common human being adapting AI in their day-to-day life, one of the common areas is, for example, speech to text or text to speech. How does that impact a common man? The ability to, for example, to learn from a standard book is not the same for each and every learner. So how do you adapt a text to speech kind of a concept and have that speech read out to you in your local language? Because the text could potentially be written in English, but when you translate that text directly to your local language, it might not make sense. So there is a contextualization that happens in the process. So instead of a direct text to speech, it actually explains the concept and the context to you. So you're able to understand what the book is all about. So there are various applications for AI, and I think right from, as I said, to a very large complex shop floor, to a very basic ability of somebody who might have, let's say, cognitive or physical inability to, let's say, consume a book. The adoption of an AI-based interface could possibly change their life and the way they learn. So clearly, the applications and ramifications are enormous.
Absolutely. There's so much innovation going on. And beyond the fear that AI will take away jobs, what's a critical aspect of this conversation that's missing?
First of all, I think when we started, when the first car was invented, before that, there used to be horses and carriages. So right from the early 1900s, every time there's been automation, every time there's been industrialization, we have always feared that jobs would go away. And yet, jobs have only increased. And today there is a complete imbalance in terms of, jobs to the people who are available for those jobs. So clearly, the impact of AI would open up multiple new opportunities and roles that we are probably not even able to comprehend today. But I would think that that's possibly the missing piece, because the application of artificial intelligence, the ability of, let's say, somebody who understands Python programming to write a program or write an algorithm with a cognitive decision-making ability is the basis of, let's say, the applications of that the product. So today, effectively, a 15-year-old or a 12-year-old could write a Python-based application. I think where we are missing a trick is probably in areas such as healthcare, for example, where the potential of AI, for example, to diagnose and to even predict a lot of global applications in terms of healthcare. And we have just come out of the worst crisis, that affected humanity, called COVID. The ability of us, of an AI engine, for example, to predict the next similar pandemic and a potential scenario of what we could do to avert it. I think that's the trick that we are missing. So possibly the biggest area of impact for any AI ML based application would be in the healthcare space, and that would typically have global ramifications. And for me personally, I think that's possibly the biggest impact area that we are missing today.
Right. And how should we prepare ourselves or upskill ourselves to be ready for any such transformation that changes the way entire industries operate, be it COVID or now with the fast adoption of AI that's coming in?
My first response to that would be to be aware of what is going on. What I find today is that we are blissfully unaware of a lot of the change that's happening. And if we are not glued into the impact of any technology, why just artificial intelligence or machine learning or blockchain? If we just see, for example, that how loan processing has changed. So if you think of, let's say, loan processing 10 years back or 15 years back, it used to be a full 30-day affair. Where you go, you have to submit your documents in triplicate and then wait for the bank manager to take a decision. Today, you can get a loan either from your peer group on WhatsApp, or you could get it from a lot of the mobile wallets, where they promise you a loan within 90 seconds. And a lot of that has come in from the fact that today you know the customer better. But more importantly, a lot of these new startups are willing to bet that customer behavior has fundamentally evolved, which means that today, if I'm taking a loan, I will repay the loan. So they're willing to take a risk and take a bet on customer behavior. Now, how do people upskill for such a change that's happening? As I mentioned, the first thing is to be aware of the change that's happening, right? The second thing is to clearly try and constantly upskill yourself in your area of, I would not say competency, but in your area of choice. Because your area of competency might have been something completely different. And today, a lot of technology adoption has become very simple because technology itself has become simplified. So when we were learning coding, we used to learn nested tables and building blocks of coding using COBOL and C and C++. Today you have low code, no code platforms. Today you have a lot of products that have been created for you, where you can completely apply a user journey from a consumer's perspective and build an application completely on your own. Today, you can build a website in seconds. There are a lot of website builders where you just have to drag and drop the application. You have to define your parameters, and your website is up and running in maybe less than an hour. Now, that is available to you, but is that something that is of interest to you? Is that something where you see a growth path? Is that something that you could potentially pursue and change the way you've looked at your career? Those are all decisions that people need to take. The one thing that most employees cannot afford to do anymore is not do anything. I think the fact that we have a vast section of people, for example, who are operating in the public sector, who have been possibly doing the same job for the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And sometimes we might feel that we are insulated from the change, but it's very unlikely that anyone is insulated from the change, because when the change happens, it's going to happen like a tsunami and everything is going to get swept under it. But more importantly, it will also end up creating a very vast section or segment of people who are potentially redundant, or they could be looking for jobs, and because they have not invested in skilling themselves up either from a tech perspective or from a new role or a new job function or a new industry entirely, those people would be at risk. So the long and short of it is that there are various options available. There are various modes available to skill and reskill yourself. It's also available at very attractive price points today. So you don't have to be spending a lot of money and going through a completely a 3-year learning journey or a 4-year learning journey to learn a new skill. I think everything is available to you in a modular fashion. It's available to you on apps. You can consume it at your own pace. You can consume it at your own speed. You can decide, do you want a basic level? Do you want an intermediate level? Do you want an advanced level of learning? So you as a consumer have so much choice. It's just that you have to make the effort to go out and get it.
Right. Some very pertinent points there, Robin. So now let's move on to the next topic, which is the participation of women. We all know that there exists a huge gap in the participation of women in India's workforce, and particularly in STEM. Now, what can be done to involve more women and other underserved communities into the workforce?
Manali, thank you for asking that question. That's something which is of particular interest to me. I think post-COVID, women have, there's a large segment of women who have dropped out of the labor force as well, and for multiple reasons. So I think while we report a certain unemployability number, I think the bigger problem is what's popularly called as labor force participation rate. So labor force participation for women is possibly at its lowest in India today. Now, I think before we start designing or planning what's popularly called as a diversity and inclusion agenda, it's very important to contextualize and understand the women who might be coming in and joining you as employees, and understand their challenges, their problems, what are the constraints within which they are operating. And also for the women who dropped out of the workforce, why did they drop out of the workforce? So one of the advantages, I would say few advantages that COVID offered us was we realized that we could continue to work remotely and businesses would still survive. So the whole work from home concept, I think, is possibly the only silver lining to the dark cloud that we went through the last few years, where there is enough and more opportunity for women to use the work from home kind of flexibility and come back into the workforce. The other challenge is, however, that remain is the skilling challenge. Do they have the right skills? And do they have the right infrastructure? So, for example, the assumption is that you have access to a laptop or the access to a smartphone. You cannot, of course, do a lot of jobs on a smartphone, for which you necessarily might need a laptop. And typically, in a lot of houses, you will find that maybe the male member of the family leaves with the laptop in the morning, and the laptop only comes back home in the evening, and there is no device or infrastructure that's available for the women in the family. The third is really the whole family structures and let's say potential constraints around things like childcare, etc., which are again very real. And fourth is what I would broadly call as motivation. So motivation is a very key factor, and motivation from an employer perspective typically boils down to the ability to offer equal pay for equal jobs, significant growth path, and of course the flexibility that a woman would need in terms of maternity leaves, maternity pay, etc., which now fortunately in India is legal. I think the whole motivation factor continues to be very important. And there are certain jobs where women also feel, for example, that are not designed for them. For example, jobs in sales. Now, typically, most women would prefer not to take a job in sales, or even a job as a delivery boy. I mean, how many women are delivering food containers today? How many women are driving cabs today? And there are certain restrictions or constraints, some conceived, some real, but overall, I think a lot that can be done to demystify some of those roles and make it equally attractive to women. So I think the whole motivation factor is very important outside of the agility that you need to provide, the flexibility that you need to provide, and of course the whole equal pay thing, the ability to give them career growth, which is completely based on their performance and so on and so forth. But as I said, the last but not the least is really the motivation, and that's a fairly complex issue.
Right. And lastly, I'd like to get your thoughts on how you think the new education policy will change the skills landscape in India, and also how you see Industry 4.0 playing out.
I would think that the new education policy is probably, 50 years too late. We should have definitely looked at this a lot earlier. The new education policy, a couple of things that are very critical. One is the whole concept of the credit bank, which gives a learner the flexibility to come back into the learning journey at any point in time and at any place of their choosing. So the fact that, after you leave your schooling, after you graduate from school, not everyone is privileged enough where they can afford higher education. And then there are a lot of people who might just want to get a vocational training. One of the reasons why India came up with the industrial training institutes and the polytechnic model was exactly that how do we provide vocational training at scale? Now, unfortunately, what happened during the way was that quality became a suspect. And, the quality of education or the quality of training that you were getting in a polytechnic was always a question mark. And industry never engaged, right? So one of the biggest challenges has been to get industry and academia to work together. So the whole concept of credit banks, the whole concept of being able to come in and have a flexible learning journey is what I think the NEP has brought in, and that's a huge welcome change. The second thing that I think the NEP will have an impact on is the fact that certain subjects like data-based sciences or let's say programming skills are now being mandatory, made mandatory across most colleges. Programming is going to become a life skill, and it's going to be one of the two, in my mind, skills that are going to decide people's future. The other one is the ability to work with data. We are a data hungry society. We are a data hungry, and we of course generate like trillions of gigabytes of data every day. The whole concept of, or the whole potential of working in the data field, whether it be as a data scientist, as a data analyst, or even a data engineer, is very exciting. And it's again one of the areas in which the NEP has been focusing on. So I think programming, basic tech skills, and data skills, I think, have been brought out in a very significant way. To your point about Industry 4.0, I think all of these skills are going to be required by Industry 4.0. Now, Industry 4.0 really is working backwards with the consumer in mind. So every product, every service is being designed backwards from the user journey. And when that happens, there's a lot of technology that comes at play, because the ability to even understand or predict consumer behavior means that you should be working in multiple scenarios, which often in cases where you have human beings running those interactions, it becomes very difficult. So Industry 4.0 will predicate a lot of its growth on data and data engineering skills. And of course, a lot of areas like programming, we have spoken about machine learning, we spoke about artificial intelligence, etc. Last but not the least, I think Industry 4.0 will also focus a lot on design. We don't spend too much time talking about design in this country. We don't spend a lot of time talking about research and development in this country. I think, design thinking, the ability to design world-class products, the ability to predict consumer behavior, the ability to do research, deep research in tech, are going to be supremely critical for anyone wishing to have a career 10 to 15 years down the line. I think so. That's one of the other areas that Industry 4.0 is going to be really focusing on going forward.
With that, we come to an end of this episode of the Wadhwani Viewpoint podcast. My name is Manali Shah, and I'll see you in the next one.